Clarity is not a gift to an avoidant nervous system. It is a demand. It is a spotlight. It is a line in the sand that removes the one thing they rely on to feel safe when intimacy starts getting real: ambiguity. And if you have ever watched an avoidant partner go from warm to cold the moment you asked a clean question, you have seen this pattern in real time. You did not threaten them with drama. You did not threaten them with control. You threatened them with definition. You asked for clarity, and suddenly you were too intense, too fast, too much, too emotional, too demanding, too serious. But what actually happened is simpler and more psychological than most people realize. In an avoidant attachment system, clarity feels like a threat because clarity creates consequence. And consequence is exactly what they learned to avoid. When the relationship is undefined, they can stay connected without being fully accountable to the connection. They can receive intimacy without having to hold it. They can access you without being seen as someone who is choosing you. They can leave without looking like someone who is leaving. Ambiguity is the perfect emotional shelter for an avoidant system. It keeps the door open, but the accountability low. It keeps the warmth available, but the demands unclear. It keeps the bond alive while protecting them from the parts of bonding that activate their deepest fear: being trapped, being expected, being needed, being exposed, and ultimately failing the role they think love requires. So in this episode, we are going to decode why a simple request for clarity can trigger withdrawal, defensiveness, or even a sudden breakup in avoidant attachment. And we are going to do it in a way that gives you power, not confusion. We will separate story from structure. We will look at what they say, then what their nervous system is actually doing underneath it. And by the end, you will be able to tell the difference between an avoidant person who lacks skills but has capacity versus an avoidant person who uses vagueness as a control system to keep intimacy on their terms. Pause here for a second. If this helped your system settle, hit the subscribe button. PsychBond is daily psychology, and we decode avoidant and anxious patterns so you stop guessing. Now, let's start with the core idea. The anxious system experiences ambiguity as danger because it cannot predict the bond. The avoidant system experiences clarity as danger because it cannot escape the bond. That is the simplest way to say it. Anxious attachment searches for definition to regulate. Avoidant attachment avoids definition to regulate. Clarity forces them to locate themselves inside the relationship, and that feels like pressure. Because once something is named, it becomes real. Once something is real, it can be evaluated. Once it can be evaluated, it can be lost. And avoidant attachment does not only fear loss the way anxious attachment does. It fears the exposure of being someone who could lose. Many avoidant people have a self-concept built around self-reliance, emotional control, independence, competence, and not needing. So when you bring clarity, you bring intimacy into language. You pull it out of vibe and into reality. You turn a feeling into a contract. Even if you do not mean it like a contract, their nervous system hears it like one. Because clarity is not just information. Clarity is structure. And structure creates expectations. Let's do the structure versus story lens, because this is where people get trapped. The story they tell you when you ask for clarity is usually one of these. I do not like labels. I want to go with the flow. I do not want pressure. I need more time. I am not ready for a relationship. I do not want anything serious. You are moving too fast. You are overthinking. Why do we need to define it? Let's just enjoy it. That is the story. The structure underneath is different. The structure says, if I define this, I have to show up consistently. If I define this, I cannot keep my options psychologically open. If I define this, I will be to integrate you into my real life. I might have to be accountable to your needs. And if I have to be accountable to your needs, I might fail. And if I fail, I will feel shame. And if I feel shame, I will need you. And needing you feels like danger. So instead of walking toward clarity, their system walks toward distance. Now, here is where you need to be careful. Not every avoidant person is malicious. Not every avoidant person is deliberately trying to control you. Many avoidant people genuinely experience clarity as emotional strain. It is not always a strategy. Sometimes it is a reflex. They grew up in environments where needs were met inconsistently, emotions were dismissed, closeness came with criticism, or dependence was punished. In those environments, the child learns a rule that becomes automatic. Closeness costs. If closeness costs, then clarity is not romantic. Clarity is a bill. Clarity is a demand for performance. So when you say, "What are we?" their system does not hear curiosity. Their system hears, "Prove it." And if they have a history of being judged, corrected, or overwhelmed, that moment lands as threat. But we still need to name the second version too. Some avoidant people use ambiguity as a power position. Not because they are evil, but because ambiguity gives them control over distance. If the relationship has no defined container, they can increase intimacy when they want comfort and reduce intimacy when they feel exposed. They can keep you emotionally invested while staying psychologically uncommitted. And the reason this works is because the anxious system interprets ambiguity as a puzzle to solve. So the anxious person will work harder, become more accommodating, become more patient, become more impressive, hoping clarity will arrive as a reward. But avoidant attachment does not give clarity as a reward. It gives clarity as a response to safety, capacity, and sometimes loss. So the more you chase it, the more their system associates clarity with pressure. That is the trap. Now let's go deeper into why clarity activates threat, specifically in avoidant attachment. There are 4 main mechanisms. Mechanism 1 is identity threat. Many avoidant people carry an identity of being independent and low need. Clarity threatens that identity because clarity forces them to admit that the relationship matters. And if the relationship matters, they are not fully in control of themselves anymore. They become someone who is affected, someone who can miss, someone who can be hurt, someone who can be left. That is not just vulnerability, that is a crack in the identity. So they defend the identity by dismissing the conversation, minimizing the bond, or reframing you as the problem. Mechanism 2 is obligation threat. Avoidant attachment often learned that love equals obligation. If they grew up with caregivers who used guilt, duty, or emotional burden, then being close meant being responsible for someone else's feelings. So clarity feels like the start of an obligation cycle. They imagine you will want more, and they imagine they will have to give more, and they imagine they will lose themselves. Mechanism 3 is performance threat. Clarity creates standards. Standards activate fear of failing. Many avoidant people have high internal standards, but low tolerance for emotional evaluation. They would rather exit than be measured. They would rather be the one who leaves than the one who tries and fails. Because failing in love is not just a mistake. In their nervous system, it can feel like humiliation. So they protect themselves with distance. Mechanism 4 is nervous system threat. Clarity increases intimacy. Intimacy increases arousal. If an avoidant person is not skilled at regulation during closeness, their body will react with agitation, irritation, numbness, or shutdown. That is not romance. That is dysregulation. And once they are dysregulated, their mind will search for a reason. And it often lands on you. You are pressuring me. You are trying to control me. You are making this heavy. That is the mind protecting the nervous system. Now, I want you to notice something important. The content of your clarity request is rarely the real issue. The timing is the issue. The container is the issue. The fact that clarity removes escape routes is the issue. When an avoidant person can escape, they can tolerate closeness. When they feel they cannot escape, closeness becomes suffocating. And clarity makes them feel like escape is closing. That is why they often respond with sudden coldness. It is not that they do not like you. It is that they feel captured by your definition. So they pull away to restore internal space. This is why you will often see a pattern where everything is good, intimacy is building, there is consistency, there is affection, there is even talk about the future in a casual way. Then you ask for clarity, and suddenly you hit a wall. And you think, I did something wrong. But you did not necessarily do something wrong. You simply touched the nervous system edge where their attachment strategy activates. Now let's apply the PsychBond filters here, because this is where you take your power back without becoming harsh. Filter 1 is the container versus temperature filter. Temperature is feelings. Warm texts, affection, sexual chemistry, closeness, missing you, good weekends. Container is structure. Consistency, commitment, repair, communication, future planning, integration into life. Avoidant people can give temperature without container. And anxious people often confuse temperature for container because temperature feels soothing in the moment. But temperature is not safety. Container is safety. So when you ask for clarity, you are asking for container. And if they are only comfortable providing temperature, they will experience your request as threat. Filter 2 is the shrink filter. If you have to shrink to keep them, you are not being loved. You are being managed. A relationship where clarity is punished teaches you to become smaller, to ask less, to accept vagueness, to tolerate inconsistency. That is not bonding. That is conditioning. Filter 3 is the proof versus hope filter. Hope says they will change when they feel safe, when they stop being scared, when they realize I am different, when enough time passes. Proof says, do they become safer over time? Do they move toward structure, even slowly? Do they repair after conflict? Do they hold your needs without punishment? That is the difference between an avoidant person who is healing and an avoidant person who is using the pattern. Now, let's name the dynamic that makes clarity feel especially threatening to avoidance. Clarity is a mirror. When you ask, what are we? You are not only asking for a label, you are asking them to locate their intention. You are asking them to face what they want, what they can offer, and what they cannot offer. And that moment forces contact with internal truth. Many avoidant people are not afraid of intimacy with you as much as they are afraid of intimacy with themselves. Because intimacy with themselves would require them to feel their own dependency needs, grief, loneliness, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen, fear of not being enough. So they stay in a relational posture that looks casual but is actually protective.
They keep the relationship in a zone where they can access connection without confronting inner truth. And clarity disrupts that. Clarity says, decide. And decision activates loss. Because every decision is a door that closes another door. Avoidant attachment prefers open doors. Open doors feel safe. A defined bond feels like a closed door. Now, let's talk about why avoidant people often frame clarity as pressure even when you are calm. Because to them, clarity is not neutral. Clarity implies future, and future implies escalation. Once you name something, there is an implied trajectory. Dating becomes relationship. Relationship becomes deeper relationship. Deeper relationship becomes integration. Integration becomes responsibility. Responsibility becomes dependence. Dependence becomes potential entrapment. So clarity is the first domino, and their nervous system reacts to the final domino. You might be asking, can we be exclusive? They are hearing, I will lose myself. That is why the reaction can look disproportionate. It is disproportionate to the words, but not to the internal meaning. So how do you tell the difference between avoidant discomfort and avoidant avoidance? Here is the signs plus capacity filter. But we are still staying in structure versus story as our main format. The story version is, I just need time. The structure version with capacity looks like this. They can have the conversation without punishing you. They can name their fear without blaming you. They can offer a timeline or a check-in point. They can increase consistency even if they cannot label it yet. They can validate your need for clarity without dismissing it. They can repair after getting triggered. They do not disappear. They do not retaliate. They do not suddenly reduce affection to train you not to ask again. That is capacity. The structure version without capacity looks like this. They make you feel guilty for asking. They mock the conversation. They call you needy. They say you are ruining it. They become cold and withholding. They disappear. They come back only when they want comfort. They refuse timelines. They refuse repair. They keep you in a vague loop while benefiting from your presence. That is not just avoidance. That is control through ambiguity. And you cannot heal someone out of that by being more patient. Patience does not create capacity. Only internal work creates capacity. Now let's address a painful reality. Some anxious people become addicted to avoidant ambiguity because clarity feels like the finish line. The anxious system starts to believe, if I can just get them to name it, I will finally relax. But here is the brutal clarity. If the relationship calms them, but dysregulates you, you are not building security. You are building regulation. In many avoidant anxious pairings, the avoidant uses distance to regulate. The anxious uses pursuit to regulate. And the relationship becomes a regulation machine, not a secure bond. Clarity is the moment the anxious person tries to convert the regulation machine into a secure container. And that is exactly why the avoidant system reacts. Because the regulation machine is working for them. They get connection without consequence. Clarity changes the deal. Now, I want to show you how this plays out in real time, because once you see the stages, you stop personalizing it. Stage 1 is early connection. The avoidant is present, charming, attentive, even intense, because early intimacy has novelty without obligation. Stage 2 is increasing familiarity. You become emotionally real, not just exciting. Your needs become visible. Stage 3 is micro-pressure. Not pressure from you, pressure from the bond itself. More texting, more expectation, more consistency, more integration. Stage 4 is the clarity moment. You ask, what are we? Can we be exclusive? Where is this going? Stage 5 is threat response. They minimize, delay, dismiss, or withdraw. Stage 6 is the loop. They come back when distance restores safety. They offer temperature. They avoid container. And if you accept temperature without container, the loop continues. If you insist on container, they either grow or they exit. That is the real fork in the road. Now, let's talk about the part that hurts the most. Why clarity can make an avoidant person flip the script and make you feel like the unsafe one. Because avoidant attachment often uses a defense called externalization. When their nervous system activates, instead of saying, I am scared, they say, you are pressuring me. Instead of saying, I am overwhelmed, they say, you are too much. Instead of saying, I do not know how to do this, they say, you are asking for something unreasonable. This is not always conscious. It is a defense that protects them from feeling powerless. If they admitted they were scared, they would be vulnerable. Vulnerability is exactly what they avoid, so they turn it into your flaw. And this is why anxious people become confused and self-abandoning. They start to edit their needs to keep the peace. They start to speak softer, ask less, wait longer. But remember the shrink filter. If you have to shrink to keep them, you are not being loved. You are being managed. And you cannot build security by negotiating away your nervous system. Now, let's be precise about what clarity actually is in a healthy relationship. Clarity is not control. Clarity is orientation. It is knowing where you stand. It is knowing what the agreement is. It is knowing how to make decisions about your life. That is not pressure. That is adult structure. So, if someone frames clarity as pressure, it tells you something. Either they are genuinely dysregulated and lack skill, or they are protecting access without responsibility. Either way, the answer is not to abandon clarity. The answer is to deliver clarity in a way that reveals their capacity. Because clarity is not just a request. Clarity is a diagnostic tool. When you ask for clarity, you learn who you are dealing with. You learn whether they can tolerate reality. You learn whether they can hold a conversation that includes your needs. You learn whether they can repair after discomfort. And that is why clarity is powerful for you. Even if it feels like it backfires, it is showing you the truth. Now, here is a common question. Should you give an avoidant person time when they say they need it? Sometimes yes, but only inside structure. Time without structure is just avoidance with benefits. Time with structure looks like, I understand you need time. I also need clarity to feel safe. Let's check in again in 2 weeks. In the meantime, I need consistency that matches where we are. And if you cannot offer that, I will step back. Notice how calm that is. No threat, no drama, no chasing. Just structure. Structure versus story. The story says, I need time. Structure says, time is not a relationship plan unless there is a container. And your job is not to persuade them to enter the container. Your job is to see whether they can.
Now let's talk about the reason avoidant people often prefer relationships that feel easy. Many avoidant systems confuse ease with safety. Ease means low emotional demand. It means no deep conversations. It means no conflict. It means no negotiation. It means no expectation. So they interpret an emotionally mature conversation as heaviness. But that is not heaviness.
That is intimacy competence. Secure relationships are not relationships with no conversations. Secure relationships are relationships where conversations do not threaten the bond. If clarity threatens the bond is not secure. It is conditional. It is held together by avoidance, and that is not a stable foundation for someone with an anxious nervous system. This is where we name the most important truth of this episode. Avoidant attachment does not fear clarity because clarity is wrong. Avoidant attachment fears clarity because clarity reveals what is already true. If they are not ready, clarity exposes it. If they are not choosing you, clarity exposes it. If they are benefiting without commitment, clarity exposes it. If they want you but cannot hold you, clarity exposes it. So their nervous system tries to escape the exposure. That is why clarity feels like a threat. It is not the question. It is the mirror. Now, I want to give you a clean way to think about what to do next, without turning this into chasing or gains. You use clarity as a boundary, not as a negotiation. A boundary is not convince me. A boundary is, this is what I need to stay. If you cannot meet it, I will move accordingly. And when you do that, one of two things happens. If they have capacity, they will feel the discomfort, maybe stumble, but they will try. They will come back to the conversation. They will increase consistency. They will name fear. They will allow a container to form slowly. If they do not have capacity, they will punish you for having needs, or they will keep offering temperature while refusing container. And that is where you stop feeding hope without proof. You stop donating your nervous system to ambiguity. You stop shrinking. You stop interpreting crumbs as progress. You choose structure over story. Now, let's address something subtle. Many anxious people think that being calm will prevent the avoidant from reacting. So they become extremely careful. They pick the perfect moment. They soften the words. They make it sound casual. They even apologize for having needs. But clarity is still clarity. The reaction is not about your tone. It is about what clarity represents to their system. So do not measure your worth by how well you presented the question. Measure their capacity by how they responded. Because your job is not to become the perfect, non-threatening partner. Your job is to be in a relationship where your needs do not threaten the bond. And if your needs threaten the bond is not stable. Now, one more layer. Avoidant people often experience a spike of attraction when you pull back after asking for clarity, and anxious people misread that as, it worked. What actually happened is the nervous system reset. Distance restored safety, so they can feel warmth again. But warmth is not commitment. Warmth is temperature. So, if you step back and they return with affection but still refuse clarity, that is not growth. That is the loop. That is the structure. Stage 6. And this is where your nervous system has to choose proof over hope. If they return, you do not punish them. You do not lecture them. You do not demand they feel what you feel. You simply hold structure. You say, I enjoy being with you. I also need clarity and consistency. If you cannot offer it, I cannot stay in this. Calm, grounded, clear, non-reactive. That is PsychBond tone. That is how you stop being trained by their avoidance. Now, let's end with the core takeaway you should remember the next time clarity feels like it backfires. Clarity did not ruin something good. Clarity revealed the container. A healthy bond can tolerate definition. A healthy bond can tolerate needs. A healthy bond can tolerate a question without turning it into blame. So, if clarity feels like a threat to them, It is telling you exactly where their attachment strategy begins. It is telling you whether the relationship is held together by avoidance or by capacity. And once you see that, you stop chasing the version of them that exists only inside your hope. You start relating to the version of them that exists in their behavior. And that is where your nervous system begins to settle. Because you are no longer living in ambiguity. You are living in reality. And reality is the beginning of secure love, whether it is with them or without them. Welcome to PsychBond. You're safe here.